Podcast 107, action. Well, welcome to the Stone Roadie podcast. That's one you don't want to miss. It stars Craig Reed, the Stone Roadie, and sometimes Griff, the rocket scientist. But today it's Kathy GODSEY, another good friend that come along. We got Robert Lamb, and I'm done singing this song.
Good job. You remembered all the
Yeah.
words.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 107th edition of the Stone Roadie Show Saturday night special with the lovely Kathy GODSEY. And like I said, we got Robert Lamb, and he was a good friend of Bob Burns, the first drummer from Lynyrd Skynyrd. So we're gonna do like we normally do. We did get a donation here this week, and we don't have our donation board up, but I got something different this time. Chris Eldridge, Chris Eldridge. He sent in $50 here in round two of this fun Forgotten Survivors fundraiser. He sent in $50 here last month, but then he sent in and said Merry Christmas and sent in another $60. So he sent in $110 here on round two of the fundraisers. We already gave Mark Howard and Gene Odom, we gave them both $1,000 out at the Memorial Morris site. So we got to give Leslie and Leslie Hawkins and Paul Welsh and Leslie and Paul. Who else? Mark Frank. Oh my God, I'm sorry, Mark Frank. We still have to send them $1,000, and we got the Blackie guitar up for auction here this on this Survivor Films. That's my seller name on eBay, but we have Blackie for sale that Billy Fender made Blackie for us donated it to the Stone Roadie Show, and it's for sale this week on my Survivor Films eBay account. So y'all got to check that out. And that money is going to go to that, and that'll make it able so we can send Leslie and Mark Frank and Paul Welsh their $1,000, and that'll make we've given all the 5 of those donators that we give the donations to. We've given them all $4,000. So we've taken in $20,000, and we've given 5 of them $4,000. So we've given it all away. So we want to thank you. That'll be the end of that for this year. And then I guess anybody that wants to continue sending in donations can send them in to Craig Reed, P.O. Box 442, Green, Ohio 44232. And we never want to forget old Jesus for Survivors. He donated $5,000 here for toward that $20,000. Jesus for Survivors put in 5,000 of us. We always want to mention him. He refers to me and Griff as disciples. So yeah, we're always going to refer to Jesus for Survivors. You know what? As we're talking about disciples, I've kind of changed my attitude towards old Jelly Roll. I kind of think old Jelly Roll's one of them disciples. I didn't know much about Jelly Roll, you know, and when I heard that Johnny gave Jelly Roll a guitar, I said, Jelly Roll don't even play guitar, you know, and I couldn't imagine why Gary would give Jelly Roll a guitar, but then I heard that Dale actually did, and I didn't kind of understand why. And then I didn't know anything about Jelly Roll, so I actually started listening to some Jelly Roll songs. I'm really actually a Jelly Roll fan.
Yay.
I heard that song Save Me, and I mean it touched right here, you know. I mean, and I'm sure that I'm not sure because I don't know, but I think if Gary Rossington heard that song Save Me, I'm sure it touched him in the same way, and it's possible it touched Dale in the same way, and she knows that Gary would like, you know, that Jelly Roll was actually a Lynyrd Skynyrd fan, you know, and he's actually done Marshall Tucker songs, and he's a real cool guy, real humble guy, you know, and I think Gary, you know, Gary really appreciates where Jelly Roll's coming from, and think that, you know, if I think Gary would that would be something Gary would do for him, give him a guitar, but you know, just for I don't know, singing those songs. And the guy, man, I don't, I feel bad about what I said about him, but then I look at what Travis Tritt said about Jelly Roll, you know, and Travis kind of said, you know, when you try to mix country with rap, you get crap, you know. So, you know, it was you know, if you know me, you know I'm kind of against people that are overweight and people with tattoos and people that smoke cigarettes and stuff. And you know, you look at Jelly Roll, he's got tattoos on his face, and the boy is just a little bit overweight, so you could see where he would kind of turn me off, you know. But just goes to show you, you know, the first impressions are kind of can't always rely on them too much, you know. And it kind of makes me understand why people are against Donald Trump. You know, they just you know, they first impression of him, from some reason they just kind of don't like the man. But I've always liked Donald, you know, I'm from the very get-go. But I know people that think he, you know, he was just a joke, you know, and they'll probably never change their mind. But you know, I think, I don't know, you got to open up your mind a little bit. I think people are getting a little smarter with this, you know. I never knew anything about politics or anything, but all I know is I'm pretty much a conservative. We'll just leave all that at this point. I'll go quit my jibber jabber, and we're gonna get into well, Kathy Godsey, why don't you just take this over? I've already talked
Okay.
enough.
I do want to just comment a couple of things you said. Okay, so Jelly Roll, if you're watching, we want you on the podcast. Okay. Talk about your relationship with Lynyrd Skynyrd. I want to interview you. All right. So we want you on there. That's right. You shouldn't judge people before you get to know them or just by looking at them. That's not really fair. So I agree. And I think it was really, really nice that you said what you said just now about him. So, okay. So real quick, before I introduce this, I'm so excited to have this guest, Robert Lamb. I just want to give two shout outs. I'm not going to do the whole thing. One to Theodore Skinner. And I want to give a shout out to Theodore because on the last podcast, I asked you I mentioned that Jimmy Buffett had passed away recently. And I asked if you had ever met Jimmy Buffett or you didn't really never met him. But Theodore pointed out that in Jimmy's song Bomba Breeze, he said thanks to Ronnie and the boys. That was a lyric in his song. And actually I've heard that on the radio. So he obviously had a lot of respect for Lynyrd Skynyrd. So that was really nice that Jimmy used Lynyrd Skynyrd's name in one of his songs. And thank you to Theodore Skinner for giving me that information. And then a just shout out to a friend of mine who likes the Stone Roadie podcast. His name is Chris Wabich. Chris is a drummer from LA. He's amazing. And he flew out to New York City last night, and I saw him in a band. And Chris Wabich is an amazing, amazing drummer and musician. Okay, there you go. So I'm not going to do the questions that are intended for Craig. I want to get right into our guest. And Kevin Taylor, a friend of yours, Kevin, reached out to me a while ago and said, you got to get Robert Lamb on the podcast. And a little funny story. Now, there's a gentleman that I'm friends with on Facebook whose name is Robert Lamb. And last week I messaged him and I said, would you like to come on the podcast? It's not you, it was a different Robert Lamb. And he said, why? I said, so you could tell your story about how you knew Bob Burns. And he said, I didn't know Bob Burns. So I realized it was another Robert Lamb. And then I found you. And you were so gracious. And we had a nice conversation about your friendship and a lot of memories and things you've had with Bob Burns and his family. And when I asked you to come on, you said yes. And I was like, yay. So I'm very happy to have you on the podcast today. And I think everyone's going to love hearing your stories. You speak very nicely, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of good information about Bob, your relationship with Bob. So before we start, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and what kind of work you do and where you grew up, and then you can talk about how you met Bob Burns and how that whole friendship developed.
All right. Well, I've gotten old now. Now that I have officially reached 60. I was actually born in Miami and lived in South Florida for about 10 years. And then we moved up to Central Georgia. And I am a lawyer. I started practicing law back in 1991. So I'm approaching year 33, which is getting to be just about enough, I'd say. And I guess I would, at this point, call myself a musician too. And that's pretty much it. And in fact, I've played guitar for years and years and years, since the mid 70s. And once I really got into the law, I stopped. It was really Bob that kind of got me reinterested in it. Of course, a professional musician, lifelong musician. And so now, I'm still active in practice, at least for now, and have one band, the Jeff Rogers band that I've played with for a number of years now, and he's got 3 albums out, and we're kind of slowing down a little bit. Jeff and I still do a lot of acoustic shows, so maybe 30 to 50 a year, and so I still try to stay active in it and enjoy it an awful lot. So that's about it. And I've known Kevin. Kevin played guitar in a band that we had with Bob that we were trying to start up, a Skynyrd tribute band, and unfortunately it was a little bit too close to the end, so we never quite got off the ground with it, but we were almost ready. And I suppose that Kevin, he in fact, I believe he was the one that said it of me. There was an incident that occurred when we had a practice one night. I got over to Bob's house. Everybody was ready to go, had a sound guy that was going to help us out. And Bob had a special relationship with cell phones. You could almost do an entire podcast on nothing but Bob and his relationship with cell phones. And somehow he wound up with 2. And he lost one of them. And no one knows where that one ever went. But anyway, so we get over to his house and we are going to practice. Only Bob refuses. He will not practice. He has lost his last cell phone, cannot find it anywhere. And he's just in a panic about it. And so everybody's saying, well, we got to start practicing this. We got to find this phone. And so they start looking for the phone. They try everything. The whole band is on their hands and knees, crawling around. Somebody calls his number and we can hear the vibration. He's got the ringer off. We can hear it vibrating. Cannot find it. There are people crawling under his dining room table, crawling under his couches, or picking up his furniture. They're wandering around. They've got the vents open and they're reaching down in the air conditioner vents trying to find this phone. I'm talking about 45 minutes of search. I'm getting madder and madder and madder. I'm about fit to be tied. I'm getting so furious about this, and I've tried already. Bob, let's just practice. We'll find it later. Oh, got to find my phone. So we're searching and searching. And the frustrating thing about it is kept calling it and we could hear it. We knew it was there, but we couldn't find it. I finally just said, you know what, Bob, I'm going home. I'm not doing this. And everyone in the band just panicked. Oh no. This isn't good. And right about that time, somebody found it. It was in his boot. He had dropped his phone into his own boot and couldn't feel it vibrating. And he picked it up and it was like nothing ever happened. Hey, Robert, I found my phone. So, but Kevin told me later, we kind of designated you. If there was anything that we wanted to communicate negative to Bob, you were the designated person, because we decided that night that the way you two fought, you guys were actually brothers. You weren't friends. You were brothers. And so, and I think that I never had really thought about that, but that probably was true. we were, I guess he had a strained relationship, good bit strained with his own brothers. And so we kind of became de facto brothers.
So how did you initially meet Bob Burns? How did that all happen?
It was actually much later. I know that when he first went on tour, his family was still in Jacksonville, of course, but by the time he went off tour, they had moved to Northwest Georgia, just in the suburbs northwest of Atlanta. And he lived there for the rest of his life, basically. But probably 20 some odd years ago, he and his wife, Marcia, brilliant woman, decided to move a little bit farther out of Atlanta. They moved up to the Cartersville area. And I actually worked in a law firm in Cartersville doing, my personal injury thing. And our firm also did real estate closings. And they were doing the real estate closing on his house that he had bought, really nice home that he bought up here, actually in Cassville, Georgia. It was on top of a mountain, very secluded, just a few other homes on the mountain. And the lawyer that did the closing came in my office and said, I recall you're sort of a rock fan, aren't you? And I said, well, yes. What do you got? He said, well, you got to meet this guy. You have got to meet this guy and his wife. You're going to just trip out. And so I went down, and there was Bob and Marcia, and we became fast friends. I mean, probably about a week later, he and Marcia, he had an old, I called it the rattle trap houseboat. And he and Marcia invited my wife Renee and I to go out on the houseboat and just hang out and eat and swim and do whatever. And that was pretty much it. We were just fast friends after that. I'd say the last dozen years of his life, we were pretty much best friends. And we talked every day. We visited every week, and we tried to start a band together. We jammed together all the time. But anytime that Bob introduced me, whether it was somebody he had known from the early 70s all the way up to the waitress he just met at Longhorn, he would say, hey, this is Robert. He's my lawyer, my guitar player, and my best friend. If I heard it once, I heard it 1,000 times. And so I think that's why Kevin and the rest of the band sort of decided that I was really his brother all along.
Oh, that's nice. That's a nice story. No, so now you said that Bob had told you his version of how Lynyrd Skynyrd started. So tell us what Bob's recollection was how the band started.
All right, this is what he told me. And interesting, and Bob was a great storyteller. I mean, just incredible. And he had a way of talking about the band that really made you feel like you were just right there with the guys. I mean, you just really felt like you were sitting around in the living room with all the guys, just looking over the past. And I love the way he told some of these stories with this. The thing about it though was, it seems like he rarely told the full story. He would do interviews on some of the Lynyrd Skynyrd movies. He did, various interviews that are on YouTube, and he would sort of tell stories around the edges. He kind of tell this part or that part, but once in a while he would just get relaxed. Maybe it was just him and I sitting there in the middle of the night. He'd start and he would tell sort of the full tale. And this is what he told me. He said, when we were 1%, we used to travel up and down the Eastern Seaboard, and we played every bar and honky tonk and small club and every gig we could possibly find. He said it was just my favorite time in my entire life. We just had a ball, and we always, we had equipment trailer behind us, and And we just went up and down and played shows, sometimes 3 nights, sometimes 4 nights, go to the next place. And he said, being out on the road like that, there were so many other bands and musicians that we knew. I mean, we ran into them everywhere. We'd open for them, they'd open for us. We'd finish up the last of some shows, they'd come in next, and we just knew everybody. And they all knew us, and we all just kind of played on that circuit and almost like a little club. He said, well, the thing was, one of the bands that we had played with, guys we knew real well, got signed, and they put out an album, and it wasn't getting a whole lot of play, but it was getting some, and it was picking up. It was definitely picking up, but it was kind of a slow process. They put out a second album in less than a year, and again, it was kind of a slow process, but they were starting to get radio play. So they were going to come to Jacksonville. We're going to play auditorium. I do not remember what auditorium he told me it was. I think there was one in particular. They played a lot down there, but they were going to play the band was coming. They were going to play the auditorium, and they asked Ronnie if his band, the 1%, would open for them. And Ronnie said, yeah, by all means. So the plan was that 1% was going to play 45-minute set, and then the recording artists, as they were now, were going to play an hour and then do encores. And that was pretty much the plan from the very beginning. The 1% was purely a cover band. They didn't have any original material whatsoever. And so the night of the show, audience is there. Ronnie comes out, of course. Then I'm guessing it was Gary and Alan and Bob and Larry. That was the band at the time. And they go out and they play, and about halfway through their set, this is all according to Bob, Ronnie calls one of the recording artists' song. Well, the other guys are like, Ronnie, we can't do that. That's their song. They wrote it. They're in the green room. And Ronnie said, Bob said, I quote, Bob quoted Ronnie, said, it's a pretty song and we do it good. And so they played this band's song. Well, the guys come out of the green room and they're standing side stage, and they're just kind of glaring. They got their arms crossed like, oh, come on, guys, what are you doing? So they finish up, did a good job on it. And Ronnie calls a second one, their song. They're still standing out there, and now they're mortified, according to Bob, his word. Bob, Ronnie, that's embarrassing. That's humiliating. They wrote the song. They're right there. They're going to play that song. We can't do this. Ronnie said, it's a pretty song and we do it good. And so they played the second song. So the band over there standing side stage is really looking annoyed, and all of a sudden they start looking at each other like, uh-oh. So they went running back in the green room because they had to change up their whole set, because Ronnie picked the 2 best ones. So they had to literally change their whole setup, had to change their encores and everything because of a stunt that Ronnie pulled. And everybody knew how Ronnie was. Bob used to say, Lacey Van Zandt, some guys, they'd fight on the drop of a dime. Well, that man would drop a dime to fight, and his son was just like his daddy. And so they all kind of knew. And Bob had said Ronnie was kind of in a mood that night. He was kind of quiet. So anyway, finish up the rest of the show. They're clearing out the auditorium. They're folding chairs, and all the guys are sitting back in the green room, and they're all laughing and joking. Yeah, that was real funny. Payback's a bitch. One day we're going to get you back for that. And and so they're all laughing about it and having a good time because they all knew each other. They were all good buddies, good friends, according to Bob. Well, the door to the green room swings open. Guitarist number 1 is standing in the doorway, and Ronnie is sitting kind of in the middle of the circle, and he's looking at the floor. Never looks up, looks at the floor the whole time. And the guitar player just death stares him and says, y'all think that was real funny, don't you? You thought that was real clever, don't you? Well, you know what? It was pathetic. Well, by then everybody stopped breathing because they knew what was getting ready to happen. And Ronnie, they pretty much figured Ronnie had this one set up, and Ronnie was in the mood, and he was going to have a little fun, getting a little bit of a brawl tonight. So they were holding their breath, and they were wide-eyed. Oh, here it comes. He said, something? I'm going to tell y'all something. Y'all are without a doubt one of the best bands out there. Nobody would deny it. In fact, in many ways, y'all are better than we are. But if you guys don't start playing your own music, you don't start learning your own stuff and getting out there and playing your own stuff, y'all are going to be playing these stupid honky tonks, and you're going to be opening for us 10 years from now. And then he stopped. He was finished with his little his little banter, and everybody was just frozen. Nobody said a word because they knew what was getting ready to happen. And Ronnie was just sitting there with his head down. And Bob said he never looked up, never said a word. He said it just seemed like an eternity. And then finally somebody cut a joke, and then somebody laughed and started giggling. And then they started laughing about it again. And the guitar player started laughing. Ronnie just sat there and looked at the floor. And Bob said that as soon as they met again in whoever's carport they were meeting in at the time, Ronnie was acting funny again. And Ronnie said, "That's it, boys. We're going off the road. We're going to do our own music. We're going to write our own songs. We're going to do our own thing. That's not going to happen to us again." And he said, and that was it. They made the decision right then and there. And that's when they went out, they found the Hell House and rented that out. And then of course the rest is known history. That's where they changed the name to Lynyrd Skynyrd. It's where they wrote Free Bird and Tuesday's Gone. And what Bob said was Ronnie's favorite song he ever wrote. Curtis Lowe said that was the one that Ronnie was most proud of. And so many of the greatest songs that they wrote there. And famously they'd practice from 12 to 12 7 days a week. But that's where they became Lynyrd Skynyrd. And the band, of course, that they were opening for that night was the Allman Brothers Band.
Oh.
And the guitar player that challenged Ronnie and won was Dwayne Allman.
Oh, wow. I was
so that was
wondering, I was hoping you were going to tell us.
Yeah.
I was going to say that story sounded familiar.
And it's funny because as many movies as they've put out, and as many times as you've seen the various members interviewed, I'd never heard it until Bob told me that. I was fascinated by it, but I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, I'd heard Dwayne told Ronnie that they were good, but they hadn't start writing their own material.
Yeah, Ronnie, everyone has heard Ronnie had always said, "I'm not going to be the Allman Brothers off-brand." So I think he that was sort of Ronnie's saying, and I think he made it true.
Didn't you say that one of the songs that they were doing as a cover band was the Monkees?
Yeah, but that was
hey, we're the Monkees.
They did. It was in the context. I was sort of Bob's best friend and lawyer before I was his guitar player, and I was playing an acoustic guitar. I bought a boat, and Bob and I had the two. Now we both had rattle trap houseboats. We're next door neighbors on Lake Allatoona on this dock, and he and Marcia came down with the entourage of doggies, and out there one late evening, and I was playing the acoustic on the front porch of my boat, and Bob said, "Robert, hey, bring your guitar, come on over." So I guess I was the entertainment for the night, and I played a bunch of things for them. I had a real nice version of Tuesday's Gone always did, which I remember he really liked. And he finally said, "Robert, I know you told me you played guitar, but you never told me you played like that. I want to jam with you." And I said, "Really?" And what a thrill it was. This is, I remember when I was just a kid listening to Lynyrd Skynyrd, and here's Bob Burns saying he wants to jam with me. And so, but he said, "Here's the thing." He said, "I'll play whatever you want to play." He said, "In fact, we played everything when we were 1%, and even as Lynyrd Skynyrd, we were still doing cover tunes for a while, and I knew everything there is. Whatever you want to play, let's play." Ronnie had us playing "Hey, Hey, We're the Monkees." He said, "Can you imagine that? Lynyrd Skynyrd playing "Hey, Hey, We're the Monkees." "I'll play whatever you want to play. Just you let me know." He said, "But I'm going to ask you a favor. I know you know some Lynyrd Skynyrd. I hear the way you play. You know Skynyrd." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, if you want to play Lynyrd Skynyrd with me, though, I got to ask you a favor. I don't like to play bar band Skynyrd. I want to play Lynyrd Skynyrd. And so if you want to play Lynyrd Skynyrd songs with me, I'd ask you a favor. Learn the songs the way Alan and Gary and Ed played them." He never knew Steve, so I don't think he mentioned Steve, but he said, "Learn them the way they go, and then learn about 5 or 6 of them, and then let's jam." And I said, "All right, hey, yeah, by all means." And I don't even remember. Obviously, I started teaching myself I'm sure the first thing I started with was tackling that Freebird solo, and I think I Ain't the One was one of them, and Call Me the Breeze, the Skynyrd version of Call Me the Breeze. I don't remember the rest of them. I just started learning them note for note, and I thought, oh yeah, I've been playing these songs since the '70s. I'll brush up a little bit so I can play with Bob, and it wasn't that way. when I started those songs, and back then it was a CD, I realized real quickly just how complicated that music really is. I mean, some of the songs a little bit simpler to play, things like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of an example. Well, many of them that seem very simple are very complicated to play, and I learned that very fast. And that's one of the things you kind of had to do to play with Bob, because Bob, he knew those songs absolutely beat for beat. He could play them exactly like he had always played them, beat for beat. And the problem that he had was, if you get up there and just start jamming like everybody does, it would throw him off, and it would embarrass him because he wasn't playing his own songs right. And so, if you did what 90% of the bar bands do, you get up there and you play the first 8 bars of the Freebird solo, and then you go into your little personal jam. Bob doesn't know what to do. He just wants to play straight beat. And so he would tell you, I don't want to play that bar band Skynyrd. But they did, and we played, it was kind of odd. We had one of the very first times I ever jammed with Bob, he had invited a bunch of musicians from all over the place to come over. And late in the evening, we all kind of got in a circle, and we decided we were going to play. And we just kind of looked at each other, well, what are we going to play? And somebody kicks in with AC/DC. So, because we couldn't figure out what we were going to play. So we played through, I think, the Back in Black album. And then we finished that up, and then so we just sat there looking at each other. Well, what do you think we ought to play here? And nobody really knew anything. So somebody of all things started playing Rush, if you can imagine that. And Bob kept up. He really could play anything. He could play, and he was playing along with his Rush stuff. And I remember we played 2 or 3 songs off of Moving Pictures. By then it was about 1 o'clock in the morning, and we finished that up and started staring at each other again. And finally somebody said, you know what, we ought to play some Skynyrd. And so I think that was the first time I jammed with Bob and played a bunch of Lynyrd Skynyrd. And I remember there was a little prodigy there, a little teenager that knew all those parts. He had studied for years, and he could play that Freebird solo and all of it.
So Robert, was 1% the first band that Bob was in? Was that his first band?
No, I know he talked about something called My Backyard a good bit.
Oh yeah, right.
I don't know much about them, but I know they went by 1% for years, actually. And
Okay.
he told me at one point that they actually always kind of planned to change that name because it had sort of the Hell's Angels kind of thing, and they weren't really badasses. They didn't want to hold themselves out to be badasses like that, and so
Yeah.
I think they really planned on changing that all along, just for that reason.
Okay. So what was so you obviously, you got to know him very well. What was he like, just one-to-one? What did you think? I mean, was he because I know you said he had some problems, some mental problems or things. Can you just talk a little bit about that? What was your impression of him?
I mean, I always loved Bob to death. I really did. But it is true that he had his ups and downs. I mean, he was on a, sort of a parabola going up and down the whole time I knew him. And he had great times, and he had times that weren't so great. And primarily what was happening with him was he had prescription medications he was on, and he would get off on those medications. I mean, he would, what would essentially happen is he kept what he called Lynyrd Skynyrd hours. And Lynyrd Skynyrd hours didn't mean that you woke up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you went to bed at 5 in the morning. That wasn't Lynyrd Skynyrd hours meant when I'm awake, I'm awake. When I'm asleep, I'm asleep. He had no circadian rhythms. He could be awake or dead asleep at any given hour of any given day. Well, in order to properly take your prescription medication, you kind of need a little bit of a schedule. And he would just get off on the schedule. And Bob was an addict. I mean, he had been an addict since the Lynyrd Skynyrd days, and you can't get off schedule with opiate narcotics. And so he would fall into that. and it would get really bad, and he would wind up getting all cleaned up, and then he'd be fine. And so there were at least a few times, to kind of get this out of the way, where it was so bad that people would just start abandoning him. I mean, just literally, that's it, Bob. I don't want any part of this. And but in general, even during those times, he really was a very good man. He was a very good person. He had a very good heart. Very easy to be friends with. He was a very interesting guy. He and I had a lot in common. We're both from Florida, and we loved water, and we loved boats, and we loved rock music, and loved Lynyrd Skynyrd, and both musicians, and loved playing, and just a very easy person to be friends with. And honestly, it every person that he met was his best friend. And it just was. If he was eating in Waffle House at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he started up a conversation with somebody, Bob Burns, Lynyrd Skynyrd, within 10 minutes, they felt like that they were genuinely his best friend. He was just that affable, really, really nice guy. And, from the perspective of, say, lawyer friends, I had a lot of folks who just said, why do you hang out with that guy? That guy's crazy. but, but he really wasn't, you just had to get to know him.
Mm-hmm.
And he
That's
had
good.
just,
Good to hear.
he had I don't think anybody, unless they have lived it or been close enough to someone like that, will really truly ever understand what it's like to be famous like that. And even at first, I didn't really think about it when I first met him, that I'm dealing with somebody who's really famous. And if I had thought about it, I probably would have thought, well, he's no Mick Jagger. This is not Clint Eastwood here. But the honest truth is, it didn't matter where we went. We could be eating at Cracker Barrel at 6 o'clock in the afternoon, and some guy traveling from Michigan down to Florida with his family would be eating Cracker Barrel and would come up to the table and say, "Didn't you play with Lynyrd Skynyrd?" He was recognized everywhere. And Bob was always, he just wanted to sit down and relax and eat. He didn't like a lot of stress, but he would always get up and shake their hands and smile and take the bow out of his hair and let his hair down and take his glasses off and do a peace sign and take a bunch of pictures and just became their best friend on the spot. And would sign things for them, and I never, ever, ever saw him even hint at being annoyed at a fan that came up to him just out of the blue, no matter what it was, no matter what kind of mood he was in. Always loved fans, but it also was a curse. And there was always craziness around Bob Burns, just always. That's why I said he needed a lawyer. There was just nuttiness around him. And it's difficult to explain how that was, but there was just so much of it that Bob and Marcia and I had sort of an ongoing joke that we had between us for years and years, and that was, we always assigned each other various issues that would arise. And so we had Bob dues, and we had Marcia dues, and we had Robert dues, and it depended on what kind of due it was as to who was going to do it. And so if some artist had called and wanted Bob to sit in, well, that was kind of a Bob due. Bob was going to talk to them and figure out what he wanted to do. With me, who knows it? I recall that some club owner down in Central Georgia wanted him and Ed to play, and so Bob and Ed were going to do a show down in somewhere around Macon, I think, Macon, Georgia. And of course, he had Bob and Ed, and I think at the time, I guess all that was left was Gary and Billy. And so he assumed, well, you know what, we got as many original members playing with this little Southern rock band that Lynyrd Skynyrd does. So he started advertising the real Lynyrd Skynyrd, which of course was going to go over poorly with Vector Management. And so that became a Robert due. And
what happened to the connection?
I don't know. He can use the link from before to get back in if you can contact him.
All right, so let me just call. We'll stay on. He was right in the middle of something, probably got disconnected. I'll just say, please rejoin meeting.
Link again.
Please rejoin meeting. Yeah, it happens. Very interesting. So while we're waiting for him to
Here he comes.
rejoin,
Here he comes.
okay,
He's
here we
coming back.
go. Okay.
He's
Can,
coming back.
can, can you see me? I'm not sure what that
I
was.
can't see
Yeah.
you, but I can hear you.
These things happen, and we don't rehearse, so we just go with the flow. It's totally okay.
Oh,
He's coming
goodness.
back up. Your
Can you see me
camera.
yet?
Do you see something that says video with a red thing through it or something?
Yeah, let me see. I'm not the most computer literate person on the planet.
It's
I can see
usually
my.
something just simple. There's at least your microphone works.
Yeah. And while you're getting your video back on, we can look at Craig's beautiful back. Look at that green screen. Can you imagine if it was that beautiful right now in Ohio? It's gorgeous. So yes, I was going to ask Craig too if you remember any of these. What do you remember while he's reconnecting? What do you remember about Bob? I mean, were you did you have was he still with the band when you joined them, or he had Bob
Oh
had
yeah,
already left?
yeah.
Okay.
I was Bob's actually first official drum roadie. I guess
Okay.
he had been had Joe Barnes and Kevin would put his drums together, but they weren't at that time. They just did everything. So when I joined the band, I was like the first official drum roadie that the band had. That was my job, was the drum roadie. That was the only thing I knew
Okay.
I was learning how to do. Yeah, so I worked directly with Bob. Yeah, so yeah, we were a pretty good relationship up until when he seen the Exorcist, and then
And that's what I'm going to ask him. I mean, I have a lot of questions for Robert. What Bob's version of leaving the band, and then what happened after he saw The Exorcist. So these are all questions that are coming.
Okay.
Are
Can you still hear me?
We can
we
hear
can hear
you.
you. Yeah.
Well, it's showing me, but it's not showing them me.
Okay.
You've got somewhere in there. There's a thing to turn your camera on. I'm not
Yeah.
sure where it is.
We may have to escape one more time and go back in. Let's just try that.
That's fine.
Okay, yeah,
That's
no
fine.
big deal.
Take your time.
Yeah. Leave the meeting, you mean, and go back in?
Yeah.
So when are you planning your trip out to Colorado to see your new granddaughter there, Kathy Godsey?
Probably January or February. They just moved 2 weeks ago. They moved into a bigger condo, and they're getting settled. And I'd have to get a place to stay out there. I'd have to stay in a hotel and get a car. So it's going to be costly. So I might go with my daughter. One of my daughters might come with me. They don't have a place where they can accommodate us, so I'll have to, arrange for that. But probably after the holidays, maybe
I
February.
cannot get out.
Craig, you know what I wanted to ask you? A question for you. Do you know why Bob Burns didn't play on Tuesday's Gone?
He didn't have a correct meter, probably. Ed actually hated the way Bob played drums. He said his meter was way off. He just
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. That was a question from Bob Varga. Bob Varga's in the Streets of Robbers band.
lot of live drummers have a hard time in the studio because their meter isn't exactly right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I guess.
Well,
What
and
they
then
said.
also, I'm going to ask you the questions while we're waiting for Bob to come back. Doug Harris wants to know, do you ever talk to Kevin Elson?
Occasionally, yeah. There's Robert. Yeah, yeah. Occasionally,
Okay. Okay. How's Kevin doing?
I haven't spoke with him
Right.
for oh gosh, a couple years.
Okay.
We haven't had the occasion to talk.
Maybe we could get him on the podcast. You think he'll come on?
Oh no, he nor Clayton Johnson have any kind of interest in revisiting that part of their life, from what I understand.
Okay. All right. And then you know what? Somebody asked the question. They wanted to know if you remember the names of Ronnie's chihuahuas.
I think Tiny was one of them. That's kind of
Okay.
the only one I remember. Yeah.
Okay. They thought he had two. And then the other thing, last week we were talking about the band that was very particular with the M&Ms. They didn't want green or brown M&Ms or something like that. So many people wrote back and said Van Halen, Van Halen, Van Halen, Van Halen, Van
Oh yeah,
Halen.
yeah.
So we know it was Van Halen. Somebody said they didn't want the green ones. Somebody said they didn't want the brown ones. It was written in the contract, and they wouldn't play one time because of their M&Ms had the wrong colors in there. So definitely Van Halen was.
Yeah, I've heard
So
that. It was Van Halen.
yeah, yeah. So you were talking about yeah, we're just talking about Bob, and with regard, Craig just mentioned while you were reconnecting, a lot of people want to know what happened with the Exorcist movie. What happened? Because you had told me some interesting things on the phone the other day about how you thought he changed after seeing that movie. And I'm sure people would love to hear. So why don't you tell us what you feel comfortable telling us?
Um, well, I mean, there were that one's kind of hard. I mean, at first, obviously, none of us on the outside really knew what happened to Bob. We just knew that we were kids and we had the Skynyrd albums, and then by the third album, Bob was gone. That guy with the wild hair and that took the picture in the fan and all that, and no one really knew why. And it wasn't like the record company was going to say that he wound up in inpatient rehab or anything. But um, over the years, obviously, we heard all the stories about what most likely happened to Bob, and I guess the most common one was that he was unable to handle the drugs like a number of the others were. He just couldn't do it, and it drove him nuts. He was not functional, and he was pretty much addicted, and that's what caused him to wash out. And of course, then we and Bob even talked about it a little bit. So I guess it's fair to say that he talked about being mentally ill, and I would say that we're not talking about the kind of crazy that like schizophrenic or anything like that. He if anything, he was just a very anxious person. He could get anxious pretty easily. Maybe a um, what do you call it, like a bipolar type thing. So he was always well within, you know, for the most part, well within his faculties. But then there was the demon, and I probably learned more about the demon from his brother after he was gone than what I knew about it in the when I was still there hanging out with Bob. You know, I saw probably all three. I think those are the three explanations about why he left the band. I personally don't think they really fully explain it, and I can certainly tell that tale. That's a Bob story. But I seeing him at his very, very best and his very, very worst, I honestly believe I saw all three of them. I saw what he was like when he was addicted. I saw when he was becoming a little mentally ill, and I would see the demon. And whether or not all three of those things were in whole or in part the same thing, um, maybe they were the same thing. But and there's probably a good argument for the fact they were the same thing. But yeah, it I knew about the fact that he had gone out with some folks when he was in Europe, and they went and saw The Exorcist. I don't think it was a whole band. My impression was Bob was kind of with some other people.
Well,
And
it wasn't in Europe. Well, they actually saw that in the United States. Then we went to Europe. But
oh, okay,
it was actually in Europe when Bob Bob was just kind of freaked out, and he actually got to the point that he kind of thought that I was the devil, and he didn't want me around. And Ronnie kind of said, Craig, when we get back to the United States, he's gone. So just avoid him.
yeah.
Just show up
Well,
at the gig and set up his drums, and when he's around, go sit at the soundboard with Kevin, and then during the show, just go out and sit with Kevin, And then when he's gone, just go up and pack the drums away and, just avoid him, So that's what I did. But then at the end of the tour, Joe Barnes and I were the ones that escorted Bob back to the United States on the airplane. Joe was on one side and I was on the other. And Ronnie said, if he gets out of hand, just knock him out. So, but which I wouldn't want to do because Bob was pretty tough. I mean,
Yeah. And he saw me the same way on occasion. He thought I was trying to kill him when he was on that downside of the slope. He thought I was trying to kill him. He thought and so in fact, I do believe one time he actually called the police on me and said he's trying to kill me.
oh, wow.
So he still had that problem, but it always coincided with when he started getting off on that medication.
How much do you know about his first wife, Carolyn?
Not a whole lot. I know he's still,
because from what I understand, because I knew Carolyn quite well.
Yeah.
From what I understand, they were having issues, and Bob was kind of, it bothered Bob. Their relationship kind of bothered him. I don't know
Yeah.
exactly why, but I just picked up on that he was really insecure about their relationship, and it really bothered him. And I think that kind of affected him a lot. I think he kind of missed her and being away and stuff.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think he never really talked very much about why he left the band. He had a saying though that he said, if I heard it once, I heard it 1,000 times. He said, they never fired me and I never quit. And he always said that over and over again, but he never really elaborated until one occasion that I kind of thought that he really came as close as I ever thought he would to saying, this is why I was no longer in Lynyrd Skynyrd. And I came to the conclusion that all that was really maybe even more symptoms of a bigger problem than than them being, I mean, clearly they contributed to the cause of him leaving Lynyrd Skynyrd, but I don't think that was the whole thing. Like I say, Bob was interesting with his stories because when he told them, he would tell little fractions of them, 10% here and 10% there. And he never really sat down and just said, this is my story. This is why. And he never said that to the day he died. But I think one evening he came about as close as he was ever going to come to telling me what his mindset was, what he was really thinking at the time. And I almost have to set it up to explain why he was just sort of in that mood to, I had gotten off work one night and I decided rather than going home, I was going to go down to the Rattle Trap houseboat. And I got down there. It was late afternoon, late summer. And when I got down there, I recognized that his boat was not in the slip. And I looked around and I saw he had his houseboat tied off on this little island across the channel from the marina. And he used to call it Gilligan's Island. And but nothing says leave me the hell alone like having your boat tied off on Gilligan's Island. That's like a giant do not disturb sign. So I did what I normally would have done. I got on my boat and changed and got my little kayak and went shooting out across there and pulled up alongside him. And he was sitting on the porch by himself. And I said, permission to come aboard, Captain. Robert, permission granted. Come on aboard. And I remember him saying that Marcia was sick and she was laying in the back. I never saw her during the whole visit. She was laying down in the back, but he was just sitting on the porch. And we just sat there. The minute I came on board, that's the last thing he said. I sat down at a chair, table. He sat down. We just sat there. I think didn't say a word. I think maybe about 45 minutes in, he said something about how fortunate we were. He said, we're just so lucky that we have these old boats and we can come out here and just relax and get away from all the stress and watch the water and I agreed with him. And then we just shut up again. And then when the sun started going down and it was going down over Red Top Mountain and it was a huge glare and I looked over Bob, his eyes were closed. He opened his eyes and he squinted and he said, Robert, that sun over that mountain reminds me of those lights. It just reminds me of those lights. He said, we played a show back in the day, played this club, and there must have been a big place, probably about 250, 300 people there. And Ronnie, he didn't want people playing pool. He didn't want people looking up at the screen, watching the game above the bar. He wanted people watching us. He said, we're the best band out there, and we want everybody to know we're the best band out there. He said, and I'll tell you what, that night we played, I still believe, the best show we ever played. That was Lynyrd Skynyrd, the finest it was. It was just an incredible show. Every beat, every note, everything was perfect. The audience was fully just right there at the edge of the stage. Best show we ever played. I never forgot it. He said, but the thing is, by then we'd put out this record, and the record company had set us up with these gigs. And the very next gig we played, we got up to the place. They drove us in the back of this place, and we went in, and there was this big stage, and there was a big red curtain, and we could hear the audience out there. And Ronnie, he goes walking down that curtain, and he starts like trying to find the opening, and we're all kind of piled up like the Fat Albert gang behind him. The whole band's just kind of, and the crew and everything, we're all just in this big crowd behind him, and Ronnie's trying to find this opening, and he finally finds it, and he peeks through, and we all peek through, and Robert, there must have been 15,000 people out there, and we were scared shitless. And we closed that curtain and looked at each other wide-eyed and said, Robert, from that night forward, our goal was to see how much we could drink and still play the show. But he said, the thing is, we'd get up on that stage, and those lights were just shining in my face, and I'd get up there and I'd mess with my throne a little bit. I'd adjust my hi-hat. I'd hit the snare a couple of times, and I could hear all those people out there. I couldn't see Ronnie standing 5 feet in front of me, and I felt like I was all alone. And he said, the happiest time of my life was when we were just 1% and we were just traveling around playing those gigs everywhere. And this just wasn't the same. It just wasn't the same. And, eventually Alan would kick in with something, and I knew what I was supposed to do, but I'd play the whole show. I didn't see another member of the band for a total of 3 minutes. And those lights are just shining in my face, and it just wasn't the same. And he said, but you want to know something? And this is the truth. He said, I dream about those lights every single night, every night. And that was his story. And, to conclude, for me to draw the conclusion from it, all I've done is get myself in trouble by trying to say what I think he meant by all of that. And even with his daughters, Lou and Kristen, they've even kind of criticized me for it, saying, that's not really the way it was. But I think, he loved the music. He loved the work they'd done. He loved Lynyrd Skynyrd. He loved his fellow bandmates, which were his brothers. But I think at least you have to ask the question, did he let all that get to him? Could he have overcome the problems that he had? And I think it was more of a conscious choice on his part. I think I'll get in trouble for saying it, but I just don't think he liked what it became. And those things were certainly part of it, but I think he also didn't fight it too hard. But that is really the closest he ever came to explaining what happened. My opinion, which I will definitely get yelled at for, is that he didn't want to do it. He kind of was the same way as Ed. Ed more famously just said, that's it, and walked off. Yeah. I think maybe Bob felt a lot more responsibility to the band. I mean, he was there from the very beginning. They started in his carport, and I don't think he wanted to let anybody down, but I don't think he wanted to do it. But that's sort of the conclusion I drew from the story he told.
Yeah, so when I talked to you last week, you pretty much said what you just said now, that his mental problems, whatever, were just exacerbated by the large venues they played in, and he didn't want that, the obligation, and kind of like the way the original band started, just playing the smaller gigs, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was, and then, I know that the drugs always is what it seemed that that's where it always started. And to the extent that he appeared to be mentally ill, or to the extent that the demon appeared, that's always where it started, was with the drugs. And I don't, I guess the best opinion I could render was that's what ultimately opened him up to it. I just think he opened himself up to it. But I much as I don't want to be a some sort of, I don't know what the word for it is. I'm not a mystic or anything, but I saw all three. I saw the demon. I saw it with my own eyes, with my own ears. I know that his brother did tell me a story about that there was a time when it came after him a lot. And he remembered one instance he told me about, where they were driving down the road. Bob was driving, and he was in the middle of the expressway, and he slammed on the brakes. He hit that brake as hard as he could, and he just said, "Leave me alone," started screaming, "Get away from me. I don't want you. I don't want anything to do with you." And of course, everyone else in the car was like, "Bob, you need to start moving. We're in the interstate. You need to go. And Bob was like, "I'm not going anywhere. You got to stop it." So I'm not the only one that saw it. But could he have overcome it? I feel like there's a possibility he could have. He was a very smart man. Smarter than just about anybody gave him credit for. So that's sort of but that was the closest he ever came to kind of telling me this is what happened. But
Okay.
according to him, they never fired him, and he never quit.
Okay. All right. Thank you for explaining that, because I know a lot of people have been asking about the Exorcist movie and how that affected him, and if that, he had problems before that, but it was very insightful. Now I have a question for, which band members besides Bob Burns did you meet? I think you mentioned that you had met Artemis at one point, right?
Yeah. We I won't tell the complete story, but he was going to do Artemis always did for years. I don't think he's done it in the last couple of years, but always did one of the Rock Legends cruises with APB. And somehow it got to the point where Bob and Artemis were talking an awful lot. And so Artemis asked him if he would come along and sit in on some songs with him. They just set up 2 drum sets and go on the cruise. And other than briefly meeting at the Hall of Fame ceremony, Bob and Artemis really hadn't, at least according to Bob, I'm not sure, I've kind of heard otherwise since, but really hadn't seen each other or really known each other and hung out, since 1974. And so Artemis had invited us to come up to Asheville and just let Bob sit in with the band, make sure he could do it, which of course he could. But so I met Artemis that way. And that was kind of an interesting thing to meet Artemis for the first time, because Artemis is he's a man that has a lot to say. He's a verbal guy. Sometimes he's the opposite, but that's when I first met Artemis, and that so I've and of course he came to Bob's funeral, and we even got to play a little bit with him in a show that we did. So finally got to do that, but and very briefly, I did meet Leon before I knew Bob. I actually represented him. He got sued. I was representing his insurance company. He was a single car accident. He was driving, and his passenger sued him. And so I met him briefly. That was the only time I ever met Leon. And it was just for a quick conversation, and that case settled, and that was. And then other than that, I talked on occasion with Bob, talked to Gary or to Ed. Usually, every time I went over to Bob's house after work, he was always on the phone with somebody. And he was on the phone with Charlie Daniels one time when I came over there. And I didn't know who he knew, but I spoke with so many people just because of that connection. I actually went on that cruise with him, my wife and I, and so I guess we were Artemis's guests, and of course met a lot of people there too. But those were the only ones I ever met. And Bob, whenever he told his stories, or even just talked about the band, he mostly talked about Ronnie and Gary. almost never talked about Alan, which I just thought was, I never understood. I never asked him why, or never had a chance to ask him why. But, he would, I know he said that Alan was always the one that packed the equipment trailer. When they were 1%, they had so much stuff that if they put one thing out of place, they couldn't move it. And so they had to pack that stuff in. And he said that Alan was the supervisor and the director, and he would get that gear on that trailer, and you couldn't put a pencil, according to Bob, you couldn't put a pencil between two bass reflex cabinets, but the door would close. But other than that, he never really talked about him much, which I just thought was strange. He never talked, he talked about Billy and him coming on board because that was such a common story. Talked about Leon some, but never talked about Alan. I just thought that was strange. And of course, he talked about Artemis because he knew Artemis, and he never mentioned Steve because he never met Steve. So,
all right. So Robert, you asked me to ask you to tell the mop story. So tell us the mop story.
my favorite Bob story from the day. I wish it would be so incredible to hear him tell the story again, because to hear him tell it, he had a way of telling that story that really was meaningful in some way, a basically meaningless story that he gave meaning to. But so they were in some arena somewhere in the abstract, and they were all in the green room. Some of the band and the crew, some of the crew were in there, and hear a knock at the door. They open the door. A couple of guys are standing out there. Y'all are on, and they, all right. Door closes, and they all stand up, stretch, and they go to the door, and the guys are gone. So they kind of look around. They walk across the hallway to the double doors, and they open up, and there's no stage. They can hear the audience, but the stage is not there. And so, they're, well, where did these guys go? Come on, it's ridiculous. So I think Bob said they took a right. They started going down the hallway, started opening doors. He said, we opened one door, no stage. Opened another door, no stage. We couldn't find the stage. I said, Bob, it sounds like Lynyrd Skynyrd was having a Spinal Tap moment. And he said, yeah, that's it. We couldn't find, we were lost backstage, couldn't find the stage for anything. So they kept walking, kept opening doors. They could hear the audience. Sounded like it was to their left, but they kept opening all these doors, couldn't find the stage. So finally, Bob opens a door, swings it open, reaches in, turns on the light, and it appears to be a janitorial closet of some sort, or a maintenance room, something along those lines. And packed with all sorts of janitorial supplies and equipment and all that. And sit on the opposite end of the room, probably 30 feet from him, is a mop sticking up in a mop bucket. And guys kind of look in, and they keep walking. Bob says, hold on a minute. And Bob, I should have mentioned, loved throwing knives. Bob was a knife thrower. The whole time I knew him. You should have seen the wall in his basement. He loved to throw knives. And so he said, wait a minute, I got to do something. So the guys stop, and they walk in, and they, Bob, what's going on? We got to find the stage. It's getting a little bit ridiculous. We're supposed to be playing. No, hold on now. I got something I got to do. What is it, Bob? Well, I'm going to take this knife, and I'm going to stick it in that mop handle. And it was, oh, come on, Bob. And no man can, that's impossible. No man can stick a knife in a mop handle from 30 paces. You can't do it. Bob, let's go. Come on, let's go. No. Wait a minute now. I'm with you, but before we go up, I'm going to stick this knife in that broom handle, in that mop handle. And they're like, Bob, it's impossible. You can't do it. You're wasting time. Bob said, no. So Bob assumes a stance. He puts one foot back and one foot forward, and he starts swinging that knife back and forth like he's sighting in that mop handle. And Bob knows he can't stick that knife in that mop handle. He's just I guess being Bob. This was the good Bob that we all knew. He coming up with this kind of stuff. And he says he licked his thumb, and he got his Kentucky windage. And then he starts. I'm left-handed, so I'm doing this backwards. And then he closes one eye, and he starts swinging that knife back and forth. And they're, come on, Bob. And so he says, I threw that knife across the room, and Robert, as God as my witness, that knife stuck in that mop handle. and it just kind of fell a little bit, but it's stuck there. I just stood there and looked. I turned around and looked at the guys, and they were wide-eyed, mouths wide open. No one said a word. They were just staring at me. So I kept character. I turned around and said, "See, I told you." And they said, so they all start walking back. They decided to go back in the opposite direction. He had to go across the room and get his knife out of the mop handle, and he's walking up behind him, and then there was a few of them. He said they were all really quiet all of a sudden. He said, I was listening to the conversation, what little there was as we were walking back. I was taking up the rear. He said, I heard one of them say, well, I didn't know he could throw a knife like that. I've never seen anything like that before. They got to put him in the Olympics. Is there knife throwing in the Olympics? I don't know, And they finally go past the green room. They get to the first door past the green room, and there's the stage. Bob said, the last thing I heard before we were climbing the stairs, somebody said, I'm still trying to figure out how come he carries those knives on stage with him.
Yeah.
That was my favorite Bob story.
You mentioned some stories about Bob driving boats, and
that was. I imagine that could be
so well.
Yeah, that could be well. Before I knew him, I would only hear stories about it, but apparently he lost control of a houseboat in one of the marinas on Lake Allatoona and took the nose cones off of about 4 or 5 speedboats or yachts. But he was like that with his boats. But I did hear one story the very morning that it happened. There was a friend of ours that had a boat on another dock out there that we called Captain Ron, and they were hanging out late one night and decided that they got the munchies, and so they were going to get something to eat. And it didn't dawn on either one of them to just get into the car and drive into Cartersville, 10-minute trip, and find, there's a Waffle House up there. They decided they were going to go by sea to a restaurant that was all the way across Lake Allatoona, all the way almost in Canton, Georgia. A good little piece, but Bob somewhere had acquired this little jet boat, and I'd never seen one before, but it's like a little plastic boat with 2 jet ski engines. And he had gotten this thing. So they decided they were going to take this jet boat all the way across Lake Allatoona, and they're going to go to this all-night restaurant that stayed open late at night. And Bob told the story. He said, yeah, we were moving. That boat, I believe it had to go at least 60 or 70. It was fast boat. It was faster than ski boat or a bass boat. It really moved. And he said we were driving down through there, and it was inky black, pitch black. We were just guiding on whatever light we could see and trying to get over there. And all of a sudden these ghosts came up. He said, I've never seen anything like it. And we're driving down through there. We're going as fast as we can, throttle wide open. And we start, it's like whoosh, 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 whoosh. And we're moving back and forth in the boat, and we're rocking back and forth. And we're kind of seeing these big white things that are like all around us. And we got scared. And so we just kept going. We figured, well, they'll be gone by the time we get back. And so they go and they eat, and they're coming back in the middle of the night, probably close to 2 o'clock in the morning. The 2 of them are in this jet boat, and they've got it wide open, and they're going back to the marina in this jet boat, and they hit it again. And they're just like, it just this whoosh, 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 and they can feel the wind, these extra currents hitting them in the face and in the hair. And they can see these kind of these images going by them, and the boat is rocking as it's going by these ghosts. And so they finally said, all right, they got their courage up this time, and they stopped. They said, we got to figure out what that was. We got to know. And they were thinking among themselves. They had, apparently when they were eating, they were saying, when they built this lake, they covered up towns, and there might have been a graveyard under there. And they might have gotten mad. We were riding our boat right over their graves. So they were coming up all sorts of stuff. So they turn around. They had nothing but a little flashlight, and they turn around, and it was sailboats. Where they had kept the sailboats out. I don't know why they do it. I've never, but they keep them out anchored in the water. They don't bring them up to the dock. And there was a little section out there beyond what they call the Allatoona Yacht Club. And there were maybe 40 or 50 sailboats. They had forgotten they were even out there, and they had somehow made it through that collection of sailboats twice
Oh my
They
goodness.
realized when they looked at their path, they had seen that they couldn't have missed some of those boats by a foot, going 70 miles per hour at 1 o'clock in the morning. And and when they went to crank the boat again, it was out of fuel because nobody checked the fuel before they left. So they sat out on Lake Allatoona until about 5 o'clock before they find someone that would tow them to shore. But they were always something with the boat.
No,
And a lot
no,
of
what
times
about-
it involved. Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. You had said to talk about the ramp story. Does that have anything to do with the boats?
The what?
The ramp story. You said to
No,
ask you about
that
the ramp.
one. That one was one I cannot remember who told it. Bob and I. There was a group of musicians. We were going to do some shows somewhere, and we were practicing for it. These musicians they had on this particular round, they were just great musicians. They were the kind of guys that I like to be playing with them just so I can watch what they're doing. A guitar player in particular that was playing with us at that point is probably the best guitar player I've ever played with. Just an incredible guy, and he had toured with Neil Young for a while. He played with Captain Beefheart, which tells you something because you get that close to the Zappa universe, you know how to play a guitar, or you don't get that close to the Zappa universe. But he was that good. But we had been practicing in Bob's little studio for days, and we decided to go eat. And I could have sworn that it was Tim Hightower that had played with Bob back in the late 70s in a band called Sky Pilot that had told the story. But when I asked him about it recently, he said, no, it wasn't me. So it was one of the guys told this story. He said that, and whether it's true or not, I'm going to assume it is, because even though it wasn't Bob telling the story, he was sitting there at the table listening to the story and he didn't deny it. So I guess, anyway, they were in Europe and they were either loading in or loading out of some venue somewhere. And there was a long black ramp. And that's where they were loading in the gearboxes and everything. And a couple of the guys and some of the crew were standing next to that ramp, and Jack Nicholson was standing there with them for some reason. And Bob appeared at the top of the ramp, and he was quite inebriated at the time. And he went to step off, and as I understand it, he didn't realize it was a ramp. He thought it was stairs. And so he thought his foot was going to hit when it didn't hit. It hit the ramp before it was supposed to hit a stair, and he fell. And he went tumbling down that ramp, literally head over heels, completely out of control. But when he landed on the ground, right at the bottom of the ramp, he landed on both of his feet. He jumped up, turned around, and looked at Jack Nicholson and said, "Hey, aren't you the one that played in One Flew Over the Chicken's Coop?"
Oh my
Now,
God.
Bob did not deny it. So,
Oh my gosh.
and they did say that whoever it was that said that Leon is the one that told them that story. So,
Mhm.
but he had a lot of them. But that was it was just always something like that when we were on that cruise. Right when the ship was leaving the port, Bob had and I and my wife were sitting in these little lounge chairs right on the front of the ship, way up high in front of the bridge, watching and just watching the ship go out. And you never knew what to expect from Bob. It was going to be something. And these two young guys walked by, late teens, early 20s, and Bob says, "Hey," and they kind of look over at him like, "Who's this guy?" I'm like, "Hey, y'all come here a minute." They walk up to him. He says, "I want to ask y'all something." Like, "Yeah, okay. Y'all ever heard Freebird?" I'm like, yeah. Who hadn't heard Freebird? We never heard Freebird. Said, "Y'all heard Sweet Home Alabama?" And two little guys said, "Oh, yeah, we know Sweet Home Alabama." He said, "Well, I'm just wondering if y'all let me bum one of them cigarettes, because that's the best I got."
Now I got another. You had mentioned a story about when Bob was driving the car. He lost control of a car. He was with his wife. What happened? I
Oh
think
no,
you
that
were
was
his
one of the
defense attorney.
well, that was one of the Robert dues. That was sort of when I became his lawyer, I guess. He
Yeah.
had a lawyer, and he down in Marietta, I believe, and he asked me pretty quickly would I kind of take over, being his lawyer. And he was somebody that did need a lawyer, I think, because there was just craziness around him all the time. And it's hard to explain. Part of it was that everybody wanted a piece of Bob, and I felt bad for him because of that. I mean, he had friends like me, like Tim Hightower, I mentioned, some others that really just liked him because he was their friend and they were his friend. But so many people around him wanted something from the relationship. And that was what I was talking about a little bit earlier, I think, before we started, about how celebrities, they just, it really is different for them. They have a different life, and it's very difficult to understand unless you're them, or unless you're, I guess, to some extent close enough to them like me to see what that's like. And like I say, he couldn't go to the corner gas station that somebody wouldn't recognize him, and which was surprising to me. And so you react. I mean, everybody thinks they know you, and so you have to react to everybody as if they know you. And there was everybody in. It's hard to explain exactly what so many people wanted from him, but it was always something. Bob, loan me $1,000. I'll pay you back next month. Bob, give me a place to crash until I get back on my feet. Bob, come sit in with our band. We need it on our resume. Bob, call UMG and put a good word in for us with some folks is just something forever and ever and ever. He had the Machiavellian mailman. Guy would come to the door every day, wouldn't just drop off the mail, bang on the door, get Bob to sign drumsticks, get Bob to sign a drum head every day. And Bob didn't mind doing it, but after about a week. And so then the mailman got mad at him because he wouldn't come to the door. So then he started throwing the mail all over the place. Bob had an imposter out west. An imposter. This guy would take the stage as Bob Burns. And I'm Bob Burns, so he would play with these various bands, and they'd play Skynyrd stuff, and he'd get up there and he'd play, I guess, Bob's drum parts, and then he would routinely wind up in jail for something. He was a scofflaw. And so what would happen is Bob would get a call. Bob, you're supposed to appear in the Superior Court of, in Boulder. What happened? Where are you at? What? I wouldn't. Where's that? Bob, you've missed your court appearance. I didn't have a court appearance, not last week. Where, Bob, weren't you in Colorado? I wasn't in Colorado. When's the last time you went to Colorado, Bob? Kind of, well, probably in 1973. And so you'd have to talk them down off the ledge. No, this wasn't Bob. It's crazy stuff like that. But he did. I think my first official act was he was in an accident. So I actually represented him as a plaintiff, and he was at a gas station, and about 1 o'clock in the morning, and there were some kids out in the parking lot acting a fool, and they were doing donuts. Well, kid lost control of the car and slammed into the side. Bob had a big old LTD at the time, and just slammed into the side of the car with him and Marcia in it, and slammed him into the gas pumps. I mean, it could have been a real disaster, but they did get hurt. And so Bob asked me, will you sue this kid? Yeah, all right, we'll sue him, get his insurance. And the defense attorney took his deposition. At some point, took Marcia's deposition, and he didn't have an idea who he was at first. But he asked him, well, and you always hear it in these personal injury, they always want to ask an injured party about their work, because it just, tells you so much about a person. What's your job? And so he said, well, I played drums in Lynyrd Skynyrd. And he said, well, when did you do that? He said, well, I ended that about 1974. And he said, okay, well, what'd you do next? And then after that, it became sort of this amorphous thing. What exactly did Bob do? He bust tables at Ryan's for a while, but that's the very dark side of all this that has nothing to do with Bob. But he really wasn't doing real well of explaining what his employment history was following Lynyrd Skynyrd, because essentially he didn't have a whole lot. And the attorney was getting frustrated and kind of trying to, because Bob did work, and he certainly, he lived off his royalties. He did well. And but the attorney just wasn't quite getting it. He was getting more and more frustrated. And he finally asked Bob, he said, Bob, I guess I'm just trying to understand what is it that you've been doing since you stopped playing drums for Lynyrd Skynyrd. And Bob said on the record under oath, I've just been trying to keep my shit together. And I tell you, that to this day, every once in a while, I get a call from that attorney saying, I will never forget that. That was the greatest moment of my career. I've taken that page out of the deposition and put it on my wall. He said, so when we mediated the case later, when he showed back up, he had the first 2 albums with him, and good old Bob, here's the guy trying to keep him from getting his fair recovery, but Bob takes his hair down and takes his glasses off and does a peace sign. And there's pictures of the attorneys and Marcia and Bob and all standing there with their arms around each other. The mediator taking a picture of all of us smiling and laughing. That's the way Bob was, even if you're the bad guy, Let me get some pictures with you, Bob. Just wanted to try to get your shit together, huh? But it was always something like that. And it could be something as simple as getting in a dispute with somebody over a rental cabin, or it could be reviewing the newest Lynyrd Skynyrd contracts. Generally, I worked gratis.
So Bob, so I know that Bob died in 2015. He hit a tree, right? In a car, he hit a mailbox or something, and then the tree.
Yeah.
Did they ever do a toxicology report on Bob?
They did not. They didn't, and they the truth is they didn't have to. I mean, there was a lot of legal stuff surrounding Bob at that time. He had in mid 13, he got off on his medication and he got really, really bad, and the worst I'd ever seen him by far. And everybody, the girls, everybody, it wasn't their fault. It was just like, we can't do this. And even I did. I just said, Bob, it's gotten too bad. I can't, got to get. And that was at the point where he thought I was trying to kill him. He was really on a low. And so I, in my infinite wisdom, called his dad, and I knew his dad. And I said, Mr. Burns, he's your baby. I'm sorry. I know you've been down this road before, but he's your baby. And so his dad, dad came and got him. And a lot of that started a lot of stuff. I'm sure the girls would love for me to tell the story, but I better lay off of that one. But anyway, they got him in rehab and he got cleaned up, and he was clean as a whistle. I mean, he really was. He wasn't drinking, he wasn't smoking weed, he wasn't doing anything. This man was absolutely clean, no medication at all. And in fact, I don't know if I should tell this story or not, but Bob, his daughters came over to his house one night, and this was after he was all cleaned up and he was doing really, really well. It was late 13, as I recall. And his daughters went over to his house, and he was laying on the couch. He was icy pale, and he was being somewhat unresponsive. And so they panicked. They called an ambulance to come get him. Well, he had pancreatitis, and he was really, really sick, and he hadn't bothered to call anybody because he figured he'd get over it. And so his daughters just happened upon him and realized, oh my God. So they put him in the hospital. And I don't think that one's me.
No,
but
that's definitely Craig.
Hello.
Somebody always calls Craig while he's doing the podcast.
This is another Medicare hotline. Yeah.
You might be eligible for Medicare
10
benefits.
times a day.
Medicare Part B.
Yeah.
Prescription. Those commercials are so annoying. They're always
Oh,
on,
I'm telling you.
especially at nighttime.
I've been getting all these emails lately on investments and stuff, which I did not ask for, and I'm starting to get 10 a day. After a while, it's
Yeah.
And so he goes to the hospital, and because it is involving his organs, they can't give him these modern drugs for pain. They have to give him the stuff that won't hurt him, and so they have to give him the opiate narcotics, and they did. But he got through it. Everything was fine, and he was about to go home, and he called me. I was at work first thing in the morning one morning. He said, "Robert, I feel great. They're gonna let me go, let me out. I'm going home today. Come over this afternoon, man. This is great. I got to talk to you about some stuff anyway, and just come on over." And I said, "Well, that's great, Bob. I'm glad you're feeling better and everything." He said, "Man, I'm telling you, just come on over this afternoon. I'm getting out of here anytime." So, okay. 20 minutes later, he calls me back. He is polluted. I mean, "Robert," he's crying, "I don't know what the nurse gave me. I'm so wasted." And I was like, "Bob, what are you talking about? You were fine." "I know." He says, I don't want to go back on that shit. I just worked so hard to get off of it, and I don't know what to do. They just gave me something in my IV, and I just, oh man." I said, "Bob, you really okay?" No, he was pretty upset. So I said, "You want me to come over there?" Cartersville Hospital, typical. So I go over to Cartersville Hospital. By the time I get there, he's already, he's starting to come around a little bit. He had a pretty high tolerance. But anyway, so I said, "Bob, what happened?" He said, "They gave me some oxy, and I didn't need it. I don't want that stuff, and they might give it to me again. I'm scared." I said, "Well, you want me to go talk to the nurse?" So this is not the most pleasant story, but I said, "I'll go talk to the nurse." So I went in there, and it just so happens that Cartersville, their director of nursing was in that nursing station, and I let them have it. I said, "God dang it, this guy's a 40-year addict, and he can't, I understand that he needed some narcotics for the pain. I get it, but he didn't need it this morning. You guys administered that stuff." Well, they started fighting with me about it. "Well, the doctor ordered." I said, "Yeah, but as good well as I do that as nurses, if a doctor gives an unnecessary order, you don't just have a right to disregard that order. You have an obligation to disregard that order. You should not have given that man oxycodone or oxycontin, whichever they gave him. You shouldn't have given it to him. And I'm telling you, don't do it again. If you do it, I'm here to tell you, I'm not just his lawyer. I do handle medical and nursing malpractice cases, and I will sue you if you do this again." Well, they were furious at me, but I was pretty mad too, because they shouldn't have done that. I had been all through that with Bob, and he went through hell, and he was feeling great, and I felt really bad for him. And so they said, "Would you just want to talk to the doctor?" I said, "Yeah, I'll talk to the doctor." So, and I'm being my typical hot-headed self. I go back in, and Bob is clearing up all the more, and and so they give me the doctor's number, and I dial it on Bob's cell phone. And Bob handed me a cell phone, and I get the phone in my hand, and the doctor says, "Well, what's the problem?" I didn't really yell at the doctor. I said, "Look, doctor, the nurses administered oxycontin to this guy, and he didn't need it. He's not in pain, and he's a 40-year addict. You can't give him this kind of medication."
Right.
And the doctor says, "No, wait a minute. Are you going to sit there and tell me that all I got to do is administer one dose of oxycodone or oxycontin, and this guy's going to suddenly become an addict?" And I was ready. Well, I was good. I was pointing at the phone, and I was getting ready to go. And Bob said, "Hey." I said, "Huh?" Bob said, "Hey, doctor." So, "Well, Bob." So I put the cell phone back to him in the bed, and he said, "Who is this?" "This is Bob." "Hey, Bob, what is?" Bob says, "Let me tell you what they tell me in my meeting. It ain't the caboose that kills you." Doctor starts laughing. The nurses standing out in the hallway listening start laughing. I start laughing. Bob starts laughing. Oh well. Robert's angry tirade unraveled. Ain't the caboose that kills you.
Wow. Wow, those are great. Craig, did you want to say anything about your relationship with Bob, or anything that
Yeah.
just comment anything that Robert talked about?
No. I thought that I've enjoyed all of his stories. I think I've just about elaborated on all the ones I ever had before, So like I said before, I didn't really have a lot of time with Bob. When I got involved with Bob, it was January 1974, basically, is when I got hired, and then Bob was basically fired before that year was up.
Yeah.
So, you know.
So
We cer-
no, I'm sorry. I was going to ask. So after Bob left Skynyrd, I mean, people asked, did he go with any other bands or anything else? People want to know what else did he do
Let
musically?
me. One thing I told that story, I forgot to kind of conclude and actually answer the question. He was absolutely clean, and you know, I'll say, and I say this as his brother. It's probably would not be humorous if it weren't for the fact that we were so close, but I always kind of had him tagged for either a DUI or an OD one. I just thought that's the way Bob's going to leave this earth, and
Mm.
but he did. He was he had some folks that visited with him that night, and then I got the call that Lou called me, his daughter, at 1 o'clock in the morning, hysterical, and you know,
Oh.
that was not my favorite night that there was, but uh, he had visitors and he'd hung out, and I don't know, about 1 o'clock in the morning, he decided either he was out of cigarettes or he was hungry. He was going to go to Waffle House and get something to eat. And he got in this old car that his dad had given him. It was one of these old, either a Pontiac or Oldsmobile. It looked like an old 70s station wagon, big, ugly thing. Bob loved it. It was a very comfortable car. But anyway, he took off in that car to either go get cigarettes or go get food or something. But he was just out of rehab, absolutely spotless clean. And he was up on top of the mountain, and just down from his house, when you start, there's a sharp, the road's kind of flat, and then as it goes down the mountain, there's a sharp left turn, and then there's a sharp right turn where it goes all the way down to the foot of the mountain. And he made that first turn, and there was a huge, huge body of water
Oh.
that was rushing from the top of the mountain down that first road and washing off the side of the road before you got to that second curve. He hit that water, rode up on top of it, and lost control. It just hit a tree, and
Oh.
that was it. And that night, you know, they told us for the longest that, you know, really wasn't any need to look at the car. You know, that there wasn't a lot of damage to Bob. There wasn't a lot of evidence of anything, you know, that somebody had died in that car. And
Yeah.
so, but at some point, Kristen, his daughter, had to go get his belongings out of the car, and that wasn't the case. It was not a pretty sight. And he had in the he had in the CD player in the car a CD of us playing Lynyrd Skynyrd tunes. He was
Oh.
always, when we practiced, he would always record it. And he wanted to go back and
Mm.
listen because he'd go through it and say, okay, that doesn't sound right. This doesn't sound right. And I was always telling him, Bob, it's not quite there yet. Please don't stop recording it all the time. I was constantly yelling at him, stop it. Now I wish he'd recorded everything and I had it all. But he had taken a CD to a friend of his. Oh God, I cannot remember his name, and I can't believe it. He passed away recently. But he had played in a band with Bob after Lynyrd Skynyrd. But he had a studio, and he had cleaned up some recording of us playing that he had made, I guess, on his phone or something, and digitally enhanced it. Um, and for some reason, he and I went to eat at a meat and three about 3 days before he died, and he had gotten that CD, and he wanted me to listen to it. So we sat out after that. We sat out in the car and just listened to us playing, and it was still in the car when he passed away. That same CD of us just
Oh.
playing Skinner tunes.
Oh.
He but they, you know, went and got the stuff out of the car, and that CD was still in there. But that CD, he and the singer in that band, Chris Holly, went down to Macon and just went to visit with Alan Walden, and they actually went. Alan took them to the big house. Or they went and ate at the H&H. Where I used to, when I was in law school in Macon, we used to go eat at the H&H all the time. And they went and ate there, and then they went over to the big house and did a tour. And Alan handed the tour guide or whoever it was there at the big house the CD, and they actually played us playing in the big house while the people were touring the museum, which I thought was pretty cool. Of course, you know,
That's
Lynyrd
cool.
Skynyrd music in the Allman Brothers Museum, but so I got the CD back, and I made some
Oh,
recordings for the other guys. but yeah, he
cool.
played in a band called Sky Pilot, and they had an album. And it seems like I had a copy of it, but I think I gave it back to Lou or Kristen one. With Tim Hightower was one of them, and I cannot think of the man's name, but the one that had the studio played with them. And I don't know if there was, other than that, from what I understand, mostly it was just sitting in with other bands. And then
Okay.
we tried to start ours up, and really, I don't really think he was able to do it. And
Yeah.
I, from my perspective, I was really doing it just because I thought it would be therapeutic to him. And that was the main reason being that was after Marcia passed away. And
Yeah.
obviously that was just, Marcia was an incredible woman and brilliant woman, and really was the center of his life, obviously. And when she passed, he was just lost. I mean, he was just really lost. And Lynyrd Skynyrd was something I knew was therapeutic to him, was something he loved and something he could love. And so, and I helped him out to get this band started, and it meant a lot to him. But in looking back, if I had done that again, I would have just brought on another drummer and just said, Bob, play with us as much as you possibly can and will. And I know he could have done it, because we actually talked about that. We talked about doing that. Just bringing on, and with our band, Bob's band, really, we've still played a little bit here and there. And in fact, we were supposed to play a Toys for Tots this weekend. I even bought some candy cane colored guitar chords to play this thing. I usually did Alan. Mostly I did some of Ed's, but mostly Alan's parts was sort of my role, I guess. And but that fell through, unfortunately. It's a story for its own day. But we had a drummer that took Bob's place as just an excellent drummer. And like the rest of us, he was very, very respectful. He played note for note, beat for beat, beat for beat, and really tried to do it right. And I know Bob would have appreciated that. But if we had done something like that when we were forming this band with Bob, so that he could sit with a second drum set, and when it came time and he could do it, and he felt like it, and he felt good, and he didn't have neuropathy that kept him from wanting to play Freebird, that would have been perfect. And I wish we had done that. But we did we played a show as a benefit for Lou, his daughter, who has cancer. And we did a benefit for her with several bands that played, and Artemis and some others were there. Michael Allman was the lead singer, so we're mostly doing Allman Brothers, but they wanted to do Skynyrd too, obviously, because it was Bob's daughter. That was the benefit was towards that. So Artemis agreed to do it, and I said I would do it. And so we, our band, Bob's band, got up and played, and Artemis came up and played with us. And so we just had double drummers, our drummer that replaced Bob and Artemis. And Artemis was at the end, I sat down and talked with him for a while. He was very complimentary. He said, I really appreciate that. He played all of our stuff. I mean, he played it exactly like it's supposed to be played. He said, if I'm going to play double drummers like that, that's the way I want it. And he really impressed me. So that was a good thing.
Very nice. Well, Bob, I'm Robert. I'm so glad we had you on today, and I think everybody's going to be really receptive of your visit on the Stone Roadie, because we haven't really had anybody talk about Bob, or anybody who's known Bob as much as you. So I really appreciate you coming on and telling us all these stories. Really, really cool. Really, really cool. And again, I thank you. I'm going to probably talk to you about potentially getting Bob's daughters if they want to come on. We'll talk about that privately.
Surely.
See if they want to come on and talk about, their life and what it was like to have him as a dad. There are a lot of things that we just don't know. So, Craig, anything else that you wanted to add today?
Oh no, I think that's about it. I think we've been on about an hour, almost 2 hours, hour and 45
Oh my gosh.
minutes.
Sorry about that. Lawyers love to hear themselves talk.
No,
and I apologize.
Well,
that's
you know
great.
what?
We
Well,
always
Robert-
do that. We've gone up to 3 hours on a podcast before. So
Well, Robert has a game he wants to watch tonight, so I was being mindful.
Yeah, that's right. He has to,
UGA class of 91 class of 88. 91 was law school, and yep, we're playing some team over in Alabama. I don't know. Yeah, Nick Saban.
And then I talked to Craig. Craig and I are potentially going to be doing Christmas Eve podcast. So we'll get our little Santa hats on, right, Craig? Your Santa class. Your hat's gonna say one thing and mine's gonna say one thing. We're not going to tell you what they say yet. You
I'll
got to
watch
check
just
it
to
out.
see that. I appreciate your having me on, though. It was fun,
Yeah.
kind of going down. We were best
Yeah.
friends for a long time, and I haven't
Yeah.
told those stories in forever and ever and ever. Oh, there we go.
Hey, by the way, if you haven't subscribed, Robert, please subscribe to the Stone Roadie, and anybody else who's out there. If you may have thought you subscribed, you probably don't even realize if you have. If you haven't, push the little button. Remember, it doesn't cost you anything. It's free. And then the subscribers, as they come in, they'll generate funds for the podcast, which will in turn give to the survivors. So it's really benefits everyone. It doesn't cost anything. So thank you again for your time. It was so nice to have you on the podcast and get to know you a little bit and get to know more about Bob. And a lot of people just didn't know all these stories that you told. So I really appreciate that, your time.
Well, I appreciate it too. Enjoyed meeting you guys.
Thank you. Anytime you want to come back, and have more stories, just hit me up. You have my number. We'll get you back on.
All right. Sounds good. I see that they've released the hounds and here they come.
Craig, what are you doing over there? You primping? Are you going to a Christmas party tonight, Craig? What are you doing with that hat? You look like the Scrooge.
This is my only Santa hat. It's got the leopard skin around it.
Here, I think Cooper here wants to say a few words.
Oh, how cute. Oh my goodness.
He's a big Bulldogs fan too, so he's looking forward to the game.
All righty, Craig.
All
so
right.
before we sign off, Craig has to sing. It's a requirement.
All righty then. Here we go. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for tuning in to podcast 107 of the Stoned Roadie Show, and another Saturday night special with your host, Craig Reed, the Stoned Roadie, and my co-host, the lovely Kathy GODSEY. And our guest today was Robert Lamb. And until next time on the Stoned Roadie Show, happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep token until then. And what's that other one?
May the good Lord take
oh
a
yeah,
liking.
there you go. And may the good Lord take a liking to you. And see you later, alligator. At the
After
wild
a while,
crocodile.
crocodile.
Later.